We're taking a long, hard look at the state of emerging markets here on ENCA. We've deployed various teams to different countries around the world to try and make sense of the emerging market crisis. Our reporter Michael Apple is in Brazil. The country saw an 11-day trucker strike over fuel prices, which has had an impact on the country's GDP. Michael is standing by for us. Michael, good evening. Brazil has been battling to recover really from one of the toughest recessions that it has faced, at least in its modern day history. And certainly some of the challenges that are facing that country may seem unique, but they certainly aren't, especially when we compare them to where we are as a country in South Africa too. Certainly there are patterns and strains there of similarities.
Yeah, that's correct, Kathy. Good evening. The economic challenges in Brazil are mirrored in many other parts of South America and South Africa and in many other emerging markets. The GDP of Brazil dropped by 8%. That is an incredible figure in 2015, 2016. So it dropped 8% and then it never really recovered, only averaging about 1 percentage point growth over the last 2 years. So they simply haven't been able to claw back that economic growth, which has led to a lot of retrenchments, job losses throughout the public and the private sector. But what has become the only alternative is for the informal sector to try to absorb a lot of the unemployed. So as you go around Rio de Janeiro, which is the tourist hub, it can be compared to Cape Town. You are seeing a lot of informal traders, people that are trying to shine shoes, that are trying to sell you something to drink, sell coconuts in the streets. They're putting together cheap sort of food packs for a lot of the unemployed Brazilians that have left the public sector, and many people are sleeping on the streets. There's a lot of people begging. The social ills, there's a lot of drug abuse, there's a lot of crime, a lot of petty crime. We were warned a lot about Rio de Janeiro when we were coming here. So how to stimulate, how to change the economic policies that have led to the current situation where you've got 13 million Brazilians sitting without a job, which is the highest it's been in Brazil in a very long time. I earlier spoke to an economist who said that the presidential candidates are going to have to answer some very serious questions about how to change the situation, how to turn it around ahead of the October 7 elections.
And certainly much of that economic outlook, Michael, in terms of whether or not Brazil will show positive growth outcomes, seems to rest on the result of this election that will be held on the 7th of October.
Yeah, it's very interesting who is running here. The candidates, there are a whole host of them, but there are only 2 or 3 main names that really stick out. And I asked Fabio Bentes, who is an economist from the local Rio Chamber of Commerce earlier, who the candidate is going to influence the markets and is going to be welcomed by the markets, or if it's going to scare foreign investors. And that's something Brazil needs, is foreign investment, similar to South Africa. And you have one very controversial figure that is leading the polls at the moment. He's a former army captain. His name is Jair Bolsonaro. If you Google him, he comes up and he's compared to Donald Trump. He is called Brazil's Donald Trump. He's called for the rearming of citizens. He wants the death penalty brought back. He's called for the chemical castration of rapists. He doesn't like blacks. He doesn't like homosexuals. He doesn't like minorities. He's an incredibly outspoken figure in Brazil. Strangely enough, he enjoys a lot of support. So I asked Mr. Bentes if he does take office, Bolsonaro that is it going to scare the markets? Because this man has a military background, nothing to do with finance. He said, well, it's interesting that the markets, how they're going to respond. It's the market uncertainty at the moment that is devaluing the currency. Foreign investors are busy looking at that election to see who gets voted in as the new president. And that's going to determine, I think, to a large extent, the future of Brazil, whether those inflation and unemployment figures are going to rise or not.
And Michael, just as it is anywhere else in the world, the high unemployment rate seems to be one of the main issues on that election ticket that all of these contenders who are vying for that post at the helm will have to address.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to have to change policy. Clearly, it's a leftist labor movement that's leading the country at the moment, and so they have to going to change from that. It's an ideological left versus right here. You've got Fernando Haddad, who's the candidate that is the stand-in for the former president Lula da Silva, who's currently behind bars serving 12 years for corruption, when a court ruled that he's ineligible to run in this presidential election. His stand-in was announced, Fernando Haddad. Then that's on the left. Then on the right you have, as I mentioned, Jair Bolsonaro. He's a far-right conservative nationalist who's whooping up a lot of populist fervor here in Brazil, has a lot of support. Fernando Haddad trails him at only 19% of the polls so far. And there is a lot of unanswered questions about the economic policies of Mr. Bolsonaro. So a lot of emphasis is placed on returning jobs and, strangely enough, arming citizens. There's a lot of crime that has been creeping up. So a lot of focus is on the safety and security aspects. And you have some that have given these incredibly extreme alternatives like arming the population and calling for the slaughter of criminals. That's the words of Bolsonaro. He's a very controversial yet strangely popular figure in Brazil.
Michael, before I let you go, what has struck you the most about being in Brazil, specifically when you look at the socioeconomic challenges that are facing that country and you almost juxtapose them comparatively with where South Africa is? Because often, you know, we tend to be so inward looking as a country that we think we are the only ones in the situation we find ourselves in.
Well, some of the observations I've had so far is that we share a lot with Brazil. We're both in the Southern Hemisphere. Our economies are very similar in a sense. We both face a lot of the same social ills, unemployment, drug abuse, crime. This is not unique to South Africa. It's here, it has to be dealt with. And politicians, well, they're going to have to deal with that. There is a lot of disillusionment, political apathy within the voting electorate here in Brazil. And it's interesting, I was speaking to a producer last night. She said that a lot of people may completely stay away from the polls come the 7th of October because they don't feel there's somebody that they can identify in any of the candidates. Sometimes the family is split. There are heated debates around dinner tables, amongst friends, on WhatsApp groups. The introduction of social media to this campaign is very important. So there are a lot of similarities between our two countries, but there is a very controversial figure which is leading the polls at the moment, and it will dramatically change the future of Brazil going forward if he is voted into office.
All right, well, certainly will be interesting to see how countries like BRICS and South Africa use their commonalities and how they find solutions to the same problems that they're facing, especially through regional blocks or through trading blocks such as the BRICS, the countries of emerging markets that has come together. Now,